As my organs systematically shut down, my final sight wasn't a flash of my life's greatest moments, but rather the twisted, triumphant smile of my mother-in-law. Fate, however, clearly made an error by returning my soul to the past. Given a second chance, I am going to make absolutely certain that I am not the one drinking the poisoned milk. The pain didn't start as a sharp stab. It was a slow, agonizing burn that crawled up my throat like battery acid. I remember the exact smell of the room at 42 Oakwood Drive in Greenwich. It smelled of expensive French vanilla candles and the metallic, bitter undertone of crushed almonds. I was clutching the Persian rug, my fingernails digging into the woven wool until they bled. Above me stood Beatrice Whitmore, my mother-in-law, looking down with eyes as cold and vacant as a shark's. In her perfectly manicured hand, she held a delicate, gold-rimmed Royal Albert porcelain mug, empty. "Shh, Chloe," Beatrice had whispered, her voice practically dripping with mock sympathy. "It will all be over soon. Charles will be so devastated. A tragic, sudden heart failure. The inheritance from your father will be in good hands, dear. Just let go." I tried to scream, but my vocal cords were paralyzed. The warm milk she had given me to help with my nerves had been laced with a lethal dose of a concentrated cardiac toxin. I choked on my own saliva, my vision fading to a static gray. The last thing I heard was the grandfather clock in the hallway, striking midnight. And then I gasped. My lungs expanded so fast it physically hurt. I shot up, throwing my arms out, expecting to hit the hardwood floor. But instead, my hands tangled in heavy, silk bedsheets. I was breathing heavily, sweat pouring down my forehead, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I blinked against the soft, warm sunlight streaming through the plantation shutters. I wasn't on the floor. I wasn't dying. I was in the master bedroom. Bad dream, darling? I froze. I slowly turned my head. There, standing by the mahogany dresser, adjusting his silk tie in the mirror, was Charles, my husband. The man who, in my final moments, I realized had been entirely complicit in my murder. He looked perfectly healthy, perfectly handsome, and perfectly oblivious to the fact that I had just lived through my own assassination. I stared at him, my mind spinning violently. I glanced at the digital clock on the bedside table. Tuesday, October 12th, 8 a.m. My breath hitched. Tuesday. I had died on Friday, October 15th. I had been reborn, or sent back. Or perhaps I had experienced a premonition so vivid, so utterly real, that it shattered the fabric of time. The how didn't matter. What mattered was the burning memory of the poison in my veins and the absolute certainty of what this family was planning to do to me in exactly 72 hours. "You look pale, Chloe," Charles said, finally turning to look at me. He walked over, his heavy cologne making my stomach churn. He reached out to touch my forehead. Mother was right. You've been so incredibly sickly lately. We really need to focus on getting your strength up. She's going to start making you those nutrient tonics before bed. The tonics. The warm milk. A cold, terrifying calm suddenly washed over me. The panic dissolved into something sharp, jagged, and infinitely dangerous. I looked up into Charles's lying, beautiful eyes and forced the most innocent, fragile smile I could muster. "You're right, Charles," I murmured, my voice trembling perfectly on cue. "I am feeling a bit weak. I'm so lucky to have you and Beatrice looking out for me." "We're family, Chloe," he said smoothly, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "What's yours is ours. What's yours is ours." My father, Richard Hastings, had left me an estate worth roughly $35 million, locked in a trust that I would gain full control of on my 25th birthday. My 25th birthday was this coming Sunday. If I died before then, as my legal spouse, Charles inherited everything. It was a classic, bloody motive, as old as time itself. For the next 3 days, I played my part flawlessly. I was the weak, anxious heiress they wanted me to be. I spent my days wrapped in cashmere shawls, nodding meekly as Beatrice gaslit me. "Oh, Chloe, you're forgetting things again," Beatrice would say on Wednesday afternoon, casually hiding my car keys. "Your mind is just so fragile right now. It's a good thing you stay right here in the house." Every time she spoke, All I could see was her standing over my dying body. It took every ounce of willpower, every shred of sanity I possessed, not to wrap my hands around her pearl-draped neck and squeeze. But I didn't want a quick revenge. A quick revenge wouldn't satisfy the ghost of the woman who had died choking on the Persian rug. I wanted her to feel exactly what I had felt. By Thursday, the pieces were in place. I had spent hours studying the layout of the kitchen, memorizing the blind spots where the security cameras didn't reach. I had watched Beatrice's routine with the obsessiveness of a predator. Every night at 11:30 p.m., she would go to the kitchen. She would heat the milk in a copper saucepan. She would pour 2 mugs, one for herself, sprinkled with cinnamon to aid her digestion, and one for me, mixed with honey, and, as I knew from my past life, mixed with death. The toxin she used was a rare, heavily concentrated extract of oleander, combined with something else, something that caused agonizing abdominal cramping to mimic a catastrophic organ rupture. She had sourced it from a groundskeeper at their old country estate. It was practically untraceable if you didn't know exactly what to look for. Thursday evening arrived. The sky outside was pitch black, a heavy rain beating against the massive windows of the Greenwich estate. Charles was, conveniently, working late at the firm, his usual alibi for when Beatrice did his dirty work. It was just the 2 of us in the house. The clock ticked closer to midnight. The game was about to begin. At 11:15 p.m., I slipped out of my bed. I was wearing a long, sweeping silk robe, perfect for hiding the slight tremor in my hands. I walked barefoot down the grand staircase, making absolutely no sound. The house was eerily silent, save for the rhythmic drumming of the rain. I positioned myself in the dining room, cloaked in the heavy shadows of the velvet curtains, with a direct line of sight into the kitchen. At exactly 11:30 p.m., the kitchen lights flicked on. Beatrice walked in, wearing a burgundy dressing gown, humming a soft classical tune. It was Claire de Lune. The absolute psychopathy of humming a lullaby while preparing to murder your daughter-in-law sent a fresh wave of ice down my spine. I watched from the darkness as she retrieved the milk from the refrigerator. She poured it into the copper saucepan. She stood by the stove, stirring slowly. Then, she reached up into the cabinet and pulled down the 2 identical Royal Albert mugs. She poured the steaming milk into both. She added a dash of cinnamon to the one on the left, her mug. Then, she reached into the deep pocket of her dressing gown. My breath caught in my throat. She pulled out a tiny amber glass vial. It was no bigger than her thumb, sealed with a rubber stopper. She popped the stopper off, her movements precise and practiced. She held it over the mug on the right. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3. She stirred my milk with a silver spoon, mixing the poison seamlessly into the honey and vanilla. I watched her rinse the spoon meticulously in the sink and place the empty vial back into her pocket. It was time. I took a deep breath, stepping out of the dining room shadows and walking heavily on my heels so she would hear my approach. "Beatrice?" I called out, my voice raspy and pathetic. Beatrice jumped slightly, spinning around, her hand instinctively brushing the pocket holding the vial. When she saw it was just me, her tense posture immediately relaxed into that sickeningly sweet, maternal slouch. "Chloe, darling!" "You startled me," she cooed, walking toward the kitchen island to block my view of the mugs, even though the poison was already dissolved. "What are you doing out of bed? You should be resting." I couldn't sleep, I stammered, wrapping my arms around myself, playing the shivering victim. "My stomach hurts. I feel so anxious." "Oh, you poor dear," Beatrice sighed, her eyes glinting with a hidden, malevolent joy. "It's a good thing I'm making our milk. Yours is almost ready. It has a special blend of honey in it tonight. It will help you sleep deeply." "Thank you, Beatrice," I whispered. "But I think I left my anxiety medication in the conservatory. Could you possibly grab it for me? I feel so dizzy, I don't think I can walk that far without fainting." Beatrice hesitated. She glanced at the mugs, then back at me. I swayed on my feet, grabbing the edge of the doorway as if I were about to collapse. "Of course, dear," she said quickly, clearly not wanting me to pass out and spill the milk before she could get it into my system. "Sit down at the island. Do not touch anything hot. I'll be right back." She hurried past me, her slippers slapping against the marble floor as she headed toward the east wing of the house. The second she rounded the corner and disappeared from sight, my feigned weakness vanished. I moved with the speed and precision of a strike team. I darted to the kitchen counter. There they were, two identical mugs. Left, cinnamon, safe. Right, honey, poins. I didn't just swap their positions. Beatrice wasn't stupid. She knew which side of the counter she placed them on. I needed to swap the contents. But I didn't have time to pour them back and forth. Wait, the cinnamon. She would look for the cinnamon on top of the milk to identify her mug. I reached into the spice cabinet, my heart threatening to beat out of my chest. I grabbed the ground cinnamon. I took the poisoned mug, my mug, and sprinkled a heavy layer of cinnamon over the top, masking the honey entirely. Then I took a small dessert spoon and quickly scooped the cinnamon off the top of her safe mug, dumping it down the sink and rinsing the evidence. I swapped their places on the counter. Left, poisoned, masked with cinnamon. Right, safe, cleared of cinnamon. I was wiping the sink with a towel when I heard her footsteps returning. I threw the towel down and slumped onto a bar stool, resting my head on the cold marble of the kitchen island. "I couldn't find your pills, Chloe," Beatrice said, sounding slightly annoyed as she walked back in. "Are you sure you left them there?" "Maybe. Maybe I left them upstairs," I mumbled, keeping my head down. "It's okay. The milk will be enough." "Yes," Beatrice said softly, a dark, victorious undertone in her voice. "The milk will be more than enough." She walked over to the counter. I watched through the fringe of my hair, my pulse roaring in my ears. She looked at the mugs. She saw the cinnamon resting on top of the mug on the left. She reached out and grabbed the mug on the right for me. "Here you go, darling," she smiled, handing me the safe milk. She picked up the mug on the left, the poisoned milk. "Let's go sit by the fire in the drawing room," Beatrice suggested, taking a sip from her mug as she walked. My eyes tracked the movement of her throat as she swallowed. One gulp, down. "That sounds lovely, Beatrice," I replied, my voice steady for the first time all week. I held my warm mug tightly, following her out of the kitchen. The trap was set. The bait was swallowed. Now, all I had to do was watch. The drawing room was overly warm, the massive stone fireplace roaring with a fresh cedar fire. Beatrice sat in her favorite high-backed leather armchair, crossing her legs elegantly. I sat on the plush velvet sofa opposite her, drawing my legs up beneath my robe. "Drink up, Chloe," Beatrice urged, gesturing with her free hand. "It's getting cold. You need every drop to feel better." I lifted the porcelain rim to my lips. I took a slow, deliberate sip. It tasted like warm milk and honey, nothing else. No bitter undertone, no metallic tang. It was perfectly safe. "It's delicious," I said, offering her a sweet, vacuous smile. "Good," Beatrice said, taking another large gulp of her own drink. "I always say, a mother knows best." I watched her drain half the mug. The toxin she used was fast-acting. In my past life, the cramps had started within 10 minutes, followed by the paralysis and organ failure within 30. I glanced at the grand clock on the mantel. 11:42 p.m. The room fell into a heavy silence, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the rain lashing against the windows. I sipped my milk slowly, savoring the absolute intoxicating rush of adrenaline. I felt like a god sitting in judgment. At 11:48 p.m., Beatrice cleared her throat. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Are you all right, Beatrice?" I asked, tilting my head. "Fine," she snapped quickly, though her hand went to her stomach. "Just indigestion. That heavy dinner." We hadn't eaten a heavy dinner. We had eaten a light sea bass salad. At 11:51 p.m., a fine sheen of sweat broke out on Beatrice's forehead. The color began to drain from her face, leaving her usually flushed, expertly made-up complexion looking like gray wax. Her hand began to tremble slightly against the armrest. "It is quite warm in here, isn't it?" she muttered, her voice tighter now. She tried to lift her mug to take another sip, but her fingers spasmed. The Royal Albert mug slipped from her grasp. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack, shattering into dozens of pieces. The remaining milky liquid pooled onto the expensive Persian rug, the exact same rug I had died on in my previous life. Oh my goodness. I feigned shock, putting my mug down on the coffee table. Beatrice, you dropped your cup. My hand, she gasped, her eyes widening in confusion and sudden mounting terror. She clutched her stomach, doubling over slightly. My stomach, it's... Suddenly, a violent, guttural groan ripped from her throat. It was the exact same sound I had made. The sound of your internal organs beginning to misfire. The muscles contracting so hard they felt like they were ripping apart. She slid off the leather chair, dropping to her knees on the floor. Chloe, she choked out, looking up at me. Her eyes were bloodshot, the veins bulging against her pale skin. Chloe, call an ambulance. I didn't move. I stayed exactly where I was on the velvet sofa. I crossed my legs, resting my chin on my hand, and simply watched her. Chloe! She screamed, the sound tearing into a wet cough. She convulsed, her hands clawing desperately at the rug. Help me! Something is wrong! I stood up slowly. I walked over to where she was writhing on the floor. I looked down at her, towering over her frail, spasming body. The power dynamic had violently, irrevocably shifted. Is something wrong, Beatrice? I asked, my voice dropping the fragile, sickly tone. It was cold, resonant, dead. Beatrice looked up at me, the confusion cutting through the haze of her agony. She saw the look in my eyes. She saw the absolute lack of pity. Call. 911. She wheezed, spit bubbling at the corner of her mouth. I knelt down, getting right into her face. The smell of expensive vanilla and bitter almonds radiated from her breath. Tell me something, Beatrice, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the roaring fire. Does it taste like almonds? A little metallic, perhaps? Her eyes blew wide open. The shock was so profound it seemed to momentarily override her pain. She stared at me, sheer, unadulterated horror dawning on her twisted features. She looked at the shattered mug on the floor, then up at my perfectly intact mug on the coffee table. You, she gurgled, blood beginning to tint her saliva pink. You. I switched them, I whispered, smiling a real, genuine smile. I know about the oleander. I know about the trust fund. And I know exactly how much this hurts. Monster, she choked out, clutching her throat as the paralysis began to set in. No, Beatrice, I replied softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her sweaty forehead. I'm just a fast learner. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the drawing room burst open. Chloe! Mother! I'm home! Charles's voice boomed from the hallway. Instantly, my cold smile vanished. I threw myself backward onto the floor, letting out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream. Charles! Charles, help! Help me! I shrieked, tears instantly flooding my eyes, pouring down my cheeks. Charles sprinted into the room, freezing in his tracks at the scene. His mother was convulsing on the floor, foaming at the mouth, her eyes locked on me with sheer hatred. And I was cowering against the sofa, sobbing violently, the perfect picture of a traumatized daughter-in-law. Mother! Charles yelled, dropping his briefcase and rushing to her side. He grabbed her shoulders. Mother, what happened? Beatrice tried to speak. She desperately tried to point a shaking, paralyzed finger at me. She just collapsed, Charles, I wailed, burying my face in my hands. We were just drinking our warm milk, and she dropped her cup, and she fell. I don't know what's happening. Is she having a heart attack? Charles pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking wildly as he dialed 911. Hold on, Mother, stay with me. Help is coming. Beatrice's eyes met mine one last time over Charles's shoulder. As the operator answered Charles's call and he began shouting the address, I lowered my hands from my face just enough for Beatrice to see. I gave her a slow, deliberate wink. Her eyes rolled back into her head, her body going completely rigid as the darkness finally took her. The paramedics arrived in under 8 minutes, but to a dead woman, 8 minutes is an eternity. The drawing room transformed from a quiet, murderous trap into a chaotic triage center. Medics in heavy boots trampled over the spilled milk and shattered porcelain, barking medical jargon as they ripped Beatrice's burgundy dressing gown open to attach defibrillator pads to her chest. Clear! The the lead medic shouted. Beatrice's body jolted off the Persian rug, a lifeless puppet on invisible strings. She flopped back down, dead weight against the floorboards. The heart monitor emitted a continuous, flat, agonizingly loud tone. Time of death, 12:14 a.m. The medic sighed, peeling his gloves off. Charles collapsed onto the sofa, the exact spot I had vacated moments earlier, burying his face in his hands. He was sobbing loudly, his shoulders heaving with the force of his performance. Or perhaps it was genuine grief. After all, the only woman he truly loved, his partner in my intended murder, was dead on the floor. I stood in the corner, clutching my silk robe tightly around myself, playing the catatonic survivor. But my eyes never left Charles. I watched him peek through his fingers. I watched his gaze dart from his mother's body to the coffee table. There it sat, my mug, perfectly intact, half empty. I saw the exact moment the realization hit him. The gears in his head ground to a halt, then spun violently in reverse. He knew the plan. He knew Beatrice was supposed to drink the safe milk, and I was supposed to drink the poison. But Beatrice was dead, and I was breathing. Charles stood up slowly, the fake tears evaporating from his eyes, replaced by a cold, manic terror. He looked at me, his chest heaving. Before he could say a word, Detective Ryan Gallagher of the Greenwich Police Department walked through the front doors, flashing his badge at the patrol officers who had arrived to secure the scene. Gallagher was a tall, sharp-eyed man in a rumpled trench coat, smelling faintly of stale coffee and peppermint. "Mr. Hastings?" Gallagher approached Charles gently. "I'm incredibly sorry for your loss. I know this is a terrible time, but I need to ask a few questions to understand what happened here tonight." Charles's head snapped toward Gallagher, but his finger pointed directly at me. "She did it!" Charles snarled, his voice vibrating with absolute venom. "She killed my mother. Arrest her." The room fell dead silent. The paramedics looked up. Gallagher raised an eyebrow, pulling a small notepad from his breast pocket. "Charles, what are you saying?" I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. I took a step back, pressing myself against the wall, letting fresh tears spill over my eyelashes. I don't understand. We were just drinking our warm milk." She dropped her cup. "She's lying!" Charles shouted, taking a menacing step toward me before a patrol officer placed a firm hand on his chest. "My mother wouldn't just drop dead. Chloe poisoned her. That milk was meant for her." He stopped immediately, realizing what he had just said. He had almost confessed to the entire plot. "The milk was meant for her?" Gallagher repeated slowly, his pen hovering over his notepad. "Mr. Hastings, why would the milk be poisoned in the first place?" Charles swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I mean, Chloe has been unstable. She's been inheriting a lot of money soon, and she's paranoid. She probably thought my mother was out to get her." "Detective," I interrupted softly, stepping forward. I handed Gallagher a tissue I had been using to dab my eyes. "I can tell you exactly what happened. I have nothing to hide." I provided the police with a flawless, chronologically airtight statement. 11:15 p.m. I woke up experiencing severe anxiety and abdominal discomfort. 11:30 p.m. I walked down to the kitchen to ask Beatrice for my anxiety medication. 11:32 p.m. Beatrice left the kitchen to look for my pills in the conservatory, leaving me alone with the hot milk she was preparing. 11:35 p.m. She returned, handed me my mug, and we walked to the drawing room. 11:51 p.m. Beatrice dropped her mug, collapsed, and began convulsing. "You see?" Charles yelled. "She admits it. She was alone in the kitchen with the milk. She laced it while my mother was in the other room." Gallagher looked at me, his eyes searching my face for any sign of deception. "Mrs. Hastings, is it true you were left alone with the beverages?" "Yes," I nodded meekly. "But detective," I didn't touch her mug. I was too dizzy to even stand straight. Why would I hurt Beatrice? She was making me my special honey milk to help me sleep. Gallagher turned to the crime scene technicians who were currently bagging the shattered pieces of Beatrice's mug and securing the untouched mug I had left on the coffee table. "Hey, Doc," Gallagher called out to the medical examiner who had just arrived. "Check the victim's pockets before you bag her." The examiner nodded, slipping on a pair of nitrile gloves. He patted down Beatrice's stiffening body. He reached into the deep right pocket of her burgundy dressing gown. "Got something," the examiner muttered. He pulled out a tiny, amber glass vial sealed with a rubber stopper. It was mostly empty, save for a few dark drops clinging to the glass. Charles's face drained of all color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He knew about the vial. Beatrice was supposed to wash it out and throw it in the neighbor's trash the next morning. She had kept it in her pocket out of sheer arrogance. Gallagher took the bagged vial, holding it up to the light. "Well, well, looks like the victim was carrying something interesting." To ensure absolute clarity during the preliminary investigation, Detective Gallagher compiled a rapid evidence summary on his tablet, which I casually glanced at over his shoulder later that morning. Evidence item. Location found. Forensic implication. Amber glass vial. Beatrice's right pocket. Victim was in possession of the concentrated toxin. Shattered mug. Left. Drawing room floor. Traces of oleander extract and cinnamon mask. Intact mug. Right. Coffee table. Tested negative for toxins. Contained honey and milk. Cellular records. Beatrice's unlocked phone. 14 encrypted calls to Thomas Gregory, groundskeeper. "Mr. Hastings," Gallagher said, his tone shifting from sympathetic to stern, "your mother had the vial of poison in her pocket. The mug she dropped was laced. Your wife's mug is clean. Are you suggesting your wife planted the poison in the cup, forced your mother to drink it, and then pickpocketed the empty vial into your mother's dressing gown while she was convulsing?" Charles was trapped. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The logic was insurmountable. Beatrice had prepared the poison. She had simply, in the eyes of the law, mixed up the mugs by accident. A tragic, ironic suicide born of a botched murder attempt. "It's a tragic accident, Detective," I whispered, turning away to hide the predatory smile stretching across my face. She must have accidentally drunk the wrong one. She was always so forgetful lately. The sheer poetic justice of using Beatrice's own gaslighting tactics against her in death was intoxicating. Charles stared at me. In that moment, the veil dropped. He saw the cold, calculated intelligence in my eyes. He realized I wasn't a victim. I was the architect of his mother's demise. And there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. The house felt like a tomb. Beatrice's body had been taken to the morgue, and the police had cleared out by dawn on Friday, ruling the incident an accidental self-poisoning pending the final autopsy. Sunday was approaching with the speed of a bullet. My 25th birthday. The day the Hastings Trust would legally transfer $35 million into my sole possession, entirely out of Charles's reach. Charles was unraveling. He paced the hallways at all hours, his clothes wrinkled, a heavy stubble shadowing his usually immaculate jawline. He was drinking heavily, the smell of scotch seeping from his pores. He had lost his mother, and he was about to lose the fortune he had killed for in a previous life. Desperation makes monsters out of men. I knew he wouldn't let Sunday arrive without a fight. He couldn't poison me now. The police were already watching the house too closely due to Beatrice's bizarre death. He needed a method that was fast, brutal, and looked like a tragedy. Saturday night arrived. The final eve. I sat in the master bedroom, the only light coming from the pale glow of the moon filtering through the plantation shutters. I wasn't wearing my silk nightgown. I was fully dressed in a black turtleneck and slacks, sitting perfectly still in a high-backed chair in the darkest corner of the room. At 2 a.m., the brass handle of the bedroom door slowly, agonizingly clicked downward. The door creaked open. Charles slipped into the room. He was a silhouette against the hallway light, but I could see the glint of the object in his hand. It was a heavy silver candlestick from the downstairs dining room. Blunt force trauma. He was going to cave my skull in while I slept, stage a break-in, and weep for the cameras. He crept toward the bed, raising the candlestick high above his head. He brought it down with sickening force onto the pillows hidden beneath the heavy duvet. Thump. Feathers exploded into the air. Charles froze, realizing immediately that he had struck a pile of rolled-up blankets. "Looking for me, Charles?" I asked, my voice slicing through the dark quiet of the room. Charles whipped around, dropping the candlestick on the mattress. He stared into the dark corner where I sat. I reached over and flicked on the small table lamp. He looked feral. His eyes were bloodshot, his chest heaving, his tie loosened around his neck. "Chloe," he breathed, stepping away from the bed. I thought I heard an intruder." "Did you?" I smiled, crossing my legs. "Is that why you brought the candlestick? To defend your beloved wife?" He stared at me, his fists clenching at his sides. The pretense was finally dead. The mask had completely shattered. "You did it," he sneered, his voice dropping into a guttural growl. "You swapped the mugs. I know you did. My mother wasn't stupid enough to mix them up. You killed her." "I merely returned a favor, Charles," I replied calmly. "She tried to kill me. You both tried to kill me. And for what? Money that belongs to my family?" "It belongs to us!" Charles suddenly screamed, rushing forward and slamming his hands down on the arms of my chair, trapping me. His breath reeked of alcohol and malice. "You weak, pathetic little girl! You don't deserve that empire. My mother and I built this marriage. We curated you. You were supposed to die quietly. You were supposed to die quietly." His words echoed in the room, exactly what I needed to hear. "So, the poison was your idea then?" I asked, leaning back slightly, maintaining absolute unbothered eye contact. "It was a joint effort," Charles laughed bitterly, a hysterical edge to his voice. "The oleander was brilliant. It would have looked like a sudden heart defect. You would have died choking on that rug, and I would have been the grieving billionaire widower. But you ruined it. You ruined everything." He reached out, his strong hands wrapping violently around my throat, his thumbs pressed into my windpipe, cutting off my air. "It doesn't matter," he whispered, spit flying into my face. "The police aren't here. I'll snap your neck, throw you down the grand staircase, and tell Gallagher you tripped while sleepwalking. The money is mine, Chloe. It will always be mine." Black spots danced at the edge of my vision, but I didn't panic. I didn't thrash. I simply reached into the pocket of my slacks and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the illuminated screen, turning the brightness up to the maximum level, and held it up to Charles's face. It wasn't recording a video. It was an active phone call. The contact name reading across the top of the screen in bold white letters was Detective Gallagher. The call duration was currently at 45 minutes and 12 seconds. Charles's eyes darted to the screen. His pupils dilated so fast his eyes looked completely black. The realization hit him like a freight train. The phone had been resting on the table, line open, the entire time. Gallagher had heard every single word. He had heard the confession about the oleander. He had heard the plan to stage my death. Charles Hastings, a tinny, staticky voice emanated from the phone's speaker. "This is Detective Gallagher. Step away from your wife and put your hands behind your head. My officers are already inside your house." As if on cue, the heavy thud of tactical boots pounding up the grand staircase echoed through the mansion. Charles let go of my throat as if I had caught fire. He stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the Persian rug and crashing to the floor. He scrambled against the baseboard, looking wildly around the room like a trapped rat. "No," he whimpered, shaking his head. No. This is a setup. She set me up." The bedroom door was kicked open. 3 armed officers poured into the room, their flashlights blindingly bright. They grabbed Charles by the shoulders, hauling him roughly to his feet and slamming him against the mahogany dresser. The metallic ratcheting sound of handcuffs clicking into place was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. Detective Gallagher walked into the room a moment later, looking incredibly tired but fiercely sharp. He looked at the candlestick on the bed, then at the red marks bruising my neck, and finally at Charles, who was sobbing pathetically against the wood. "You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Hastings," Gallagher said dryly. "Though I highly suggest you use it now, considering you've been talking for the last 10 minutes. "She killed my mother!" Charles screamed as the officers began dragging him toward the door. He craned his neck, looking back at me with absolute, unrestrained hatred. She's a murderer! Look at her! Look at her eyes. I stood up slowly from my chair, smoothing out the invisible wrinkles in my slacks. I walked over to where Charles was being held in the doorway. I stopped just inches from his face. "Goodbye, Charles," I whispered, my voice cold and final. "Enjoy the inheritance." They dragged him screaming down the hallway. I stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, listening to his voice fade as they hauled him out into the cold, rainy Greenwich night. I walked over to the large bay windows and looked out at the driveway. The red and blue police lights painted the manicured lawns in flashing neon. I watched them shove Charles into the back of a squad car, his face pressed against the glass, staring up at my window. I raised my hand and gave him a slow, deliberate wave. The car pulled away, disappearing down Oakwood Drive forever. The house was finally silent. No Beatrice, no Charles, just me and the ghosts of a timeline that would never come to pass. I walked over to my bedside table. The digital clock flicked over. Sunday, October 17th, 12 a.m. Happy 25th birthday to me. The $35 million was officially mine. I poured myself a glass of vintage Dom Perignon from the mini fridge, raised the crystal flute to the empty room, and took a long, satisfying sip. It tasted absolutely perfect. No bitter undertones, no metallic tang, just the sweet, intoxicating flavor of absolute victory. Wow, what a wild ride of revenge and karma. If you loved seeing Chloe outsmart her toxic in-laws and take back her fortune, hit that like button right now. Share this video with a friend who loves a satisfying plot twist. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for more insane real-life drama stories every single week. What would you have done in Chloe's shoes? Let me know in the comments below.